Welcome to a very special episode of Life is But a Stream. This is one that's particularly interesting because it's our first that is on scene here at Current London 2025. We're here talking about the Data Streaming Report. This is our fourth edition of the report. And for any of you that may not be familiar with it, we poll IT leaders globally across multiple verticals to understand how they're using data streaming in their industries and in their organizations. We want to learn, are they adopting it? Are they not adopting it? What are the interesting aspects and how are they using it today? And joining me is Andrew Sellers, our Senior Director of the Technical Strategy Group here at Confluent. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I'm doing outstanding. I'm so glad to be here, especially for the first on location, edition. This is awesome.
So, Andrew, can you tell me what your team does here at Confluent?
Yeah, so the Technology Strategy Group is a multidisciplinary team of research technologists. So people who look across the market and figure out, what is going on in distributed systems and what trends we can take advantage of to make Confluent better projects. We have the customer product advisory boards here. We have the global field CTOs, and we have AI strategy. And so I really love it because we sit really at the nexus of product and go-to-market. Mm-hmm. And we help take those, we'll say at times disparate insights one gets from prospects, from customers, from the market, from the wider technology landscape. And we distill that into actionable intelligence for the company.
So for this year's report, we polled over 4,100 IT leaders globally. Andrew, can you tell us a bit more about the report in general, about why we can dive into the report every year?
I think the data stream report is really special. And so I think we look at things like TCO, we look at things like ROI, we look at time to market, and we look at emerging technology trends. I think it ends up being a key way in which we learn a lot too about how our buyers make their decisions and also about where they value data streaming within the wider technology ecosystem. So, it's one of my favorite things we do every year. I always learn a lot from it. I always learn a lot from the surveys and from our executives.
Absolutely. I mean, clearly here at Confluent, we are very over-indexed and we are very invested in data streaming, but the report actually helps us do a pulse check on the industry to make sure, are they aligned as well? And, as we'll discuss today, I think that is absolutely evident from this year's report. So there's something that is exposed, we talk about quite a bit here at Confluent and in the report, data streaming platforms.
Yes.
Andrew, can you talk a bit more about how data streaming platform extends data streaming?
Yeah. So, data streaming is a wonderful technology. It's been around for almost 30 years now. The idea is that we invented these things to decouple the way that different producers and consumers of information talk to one another. And so with, an event broker, someone can consume information without having to worry too much about how the data speaks. Without understanding am I creating a bunch of back pressure in that producer? The producer can shovel information, not have to worry too much. Is this consumer list? Is it ready to go? It provides this common operating model for exchange of information. Well, what we found in over a decade of doing this at Confluent with over 6,000 customers is while data streaming is wonderful, the event broker itself is simply not enough. If I want to get to the point where I'm decoupling not just systems, but teams and technologies, where I've got one team and one business unit producing data that can be used by some other team, some other business unit, without a bunch of out-of-band coordination, it turns out I actually need more than just an event broker. I actually need the ability to govern that data so it can be contextualized, so it can be understood, so it can be trustworthy. I need the ability to transform that data so it can adhere to whatever common consumption patterns the enterprise requires. And I need to be able to connect that data to anything else that can't exist in the back. So anything else the process is data. And so then those four components together, stream, govern, process, connect. That's what, our opinionated approach to the data streaming platform is. And again, after 10 years and 6,000 customers, I feel pretty confident that's the right component set to actually make data this reusable asset.
So in every report we have annually, we get some key findings. So let's dive right into the first key one. So in our first finding, we're talking about return on investment. So we found that 44% of our respondents are finding 5 times return on investment on their data streaming. So Andrew, let's talk about that. That seems like a pretty big number, 5 times return on investment.
Yeah.
I know you're talking constantly with technical leaders globally. What do you think is fair?
So first of all, I will say to emphasize that is an extraordinary thing. I think in enterprise IT, we often find the opposite, where you make an investment and then there are diminishing returns. The thing that's so extraordinary about data streaming, what the survey data informs us about, is that the more one invests in it, the better the ROI becomes. And I think the intuition there is you get more data streaming in more parts of the organization. There's more data reuse. that basically is you have customer data and, operations data and manufacturing data all in the same place. You're able to make these aggregate data products from it that allow you to bring more insights to market, that allow you to bring more applications to market. And I think an extraordinary thing about building, applications and building reports and learning about the business is one of the fundamental barriers to it is data.
Yes.
I think there are, different industry analysts that look at this and suggest that perhaps 90% of the time spent on bringing a new application to market is a matter of data modeling. It's not actually deciding the business logic. It's finding out wherever the disparate data is and it's siloed in the enterprise, bringing it together in one place, normalizing it so it's ready, and only then can you then do that other work. And I just think it's really extraordinary then that, data streaming is really situated in a way that it makes data this discoverable, contextualized, secure, trustworthy asset. So that 90% is a lot less than it used to be. I've been doing this a long time, and one of the truisms of my career in data is that the bigger data gets, the more specialized one has to be in how data is organized and queried. And the specialization of data streaming is data is meant to be consumable. So with many of these other paradigms, I put data at rest. I use a wide column store. I almost have to denormalize to the point where I have a column family per query. I need to actually know a priori what questions I want to ask of my data. And the wonderful thing about data streaming is that asking a new question or building a new application, it's as simple as instantiating a new server. I just have to do this again, and then I can actually find new things. And so it turns out that it's a validating of our intuition to find that the executives see it. The more of that they do, the more benefit they get. And I do think that is extraordinary. And I think it is exactly to that the consumable nature of data streaming, that the more data we add to the data streaming platform, the more that we get value from, which is just, I think, extraordinary.
So something I really want to double click on with you, Andrew, and that you mentioned data availability.
Yeah.
And again, focusing on like larger or even mid-sized enterprise, it's very surprising about how much of that data is siloed.
Yeah.
Right. Even both from a technological container standpoint, okay, only a certain group of people have access to this particular database, but also in that, there are multiple business units inside of an enterprise, and they may not share data, which is so surprising to me, right? Because when you have some of these larger enterprises, if you're not sharing data between these different operating teams, how are you really getting those full insights as a leader, as a CEO, right? So there's something we talk about quite a bit here at Confluent, and that's a maturity scale. Right. So the idea is that early in that maturity scale, it's about onboarding maybe like a single use case data streaming. But you can get all the way to the point where, data streaming is the lifeblood, the information superhighway of all your operational data. Yeah. And the interesting thing is from the report, we saw that even those in the lower part, that early adoption stage, are getting anywhere between 2 to 5x, up to 5x return on investment. So I'm curious, Andrew, again, in your experience and your conversations, why do you think even those early adopters are getting such high ROI?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think we study this a lot. Again, I've spent a lot of my time over the last few years thinking about our customer maturity curve and our customer journey. And so, one thing I will say is that it's important to follow that progression exactly as you say. You can't just go in and say, "Oh, we're going to make $100 million investment and transform the entire organization to data streaming," and those things never work. That kind of investment, in order, when it's that big, has to be all things, all people. Nothing can live up to that.
Right, of course.
And so what we find that works far better is, again, as you said, you pick that single exemplary use case. You find this thing where data streaming is really going to help. And you build some confidence and you build some muscle memory in data streaming. And you convince the organization this is worth doing. This is a paradigm worth learning and investing in. And, I think for many organizations, it starts with a real-time use case.
Right.
But then I think what they find is exactly what we talked about before, that another superpower of data streaming is not just sort of for these, high throughput, real-time kinds of use cases. It's just so powerful for decoupling team systems and technologies. So when we build new software, we want to make data this reusable asset, even if there's not, a low sub-second requirement for some of this data. It just turns out data streaming is a better way to build these applications. And I think, though, you don't really learn that as an enterprise until you've done it a few times for a few critical applications. And so I think that right away, we see that the customers get value out of that. They use their first fraud detection case or preventive maintenance or whatever the industry is. There's usually something there where they just unlock some great value and they see ROI from it. And then from there, I think that value can only accelerate as they make greater investments.
Yeah, it's all about starting with that snowball at the top of the mountain, right? Getting it rolling, it starts picking up other snow. And the thing that we talked about, or I've been here almost 5 years, is the data streaming networking effect, right?
Yeah.
As you and I both know, and maybe the audience doesn't know, for every message that is produced into data streaming, it's usually consumed multiple times. Usually, and that multiplier can depend on how far you're up your maturity curve. So, what I've seen is, when someone starts with that first use case, suddenly there'll be other business units or other technical teams that go, you know what, I can subscribe to that stream of data. And now I can in my business unit do interesting things with that data that I never had access to before, because maybe it was siloed off in a database or a mainframe, but suddenly the availability because of our integration technologies, really allows you to take advantage of data that you never could before. So our second finding is how data streaming platforms future-proof your data for use cases that may not even exist today. So the one number that I thought was really interesting is that 89% of the respondents mentioned that data streaming platforms are absolutely critical for future-proofing data. So where do you think that is coming, Andrew?
I think it's a few places. I think the first thing is something you alluded to with the previous finding, that historically enterprises have done a lot around eschewing integrated data stores. This was an anti-pattern for a long time. We found that for data and fault isolation regions, it was really important to build these microservices that all had their own data store.
Right.
And it worked well and it solved a lot of problems. But what it did is it created these data silos. Right. And it helped us operate businesses, but finding insight from the data to better power our businesses, it wasn't, I would say fully adequate at that. And I think what data streaming does is it helps integrate those, we'll say disparate data stores.
Right.
It helps contextualize them. So that data is not only, sort of integrated, it can be consumed and understood. And that ends up being really important with a lot of the technology trends today. I think one of the big ones that we obviously take a hard look at is artificial intelligence. AI always felt like this thing that was like just on the cusp of being relevant. It was always 3 to 4 years away. And obviously this moment feels different. And I think that the difference between those enterprises that can really take advantage of it and those that struggle a bit more is a data readiness issue. And I think data streaming can really help with that, because AI, in a sense, we're building these agents that are reactive, that don't have these prescribed workflows, which means there are prescribed query patterns. And so all of the data has to be out there. It has to be discoverable. It has to be in a place where it can be, real time, because the agent needs to be able to react to it. And I think that more and more for competitive businesses, it was sort of enough to use data to operate, but your business was something else. Whereas more and more now, data is your business.
Yeah.
And I think that in that world, we can't afford, these isolated data silos any longer. And so I think it absolutely makes sense to me that in order to combat that, to actually integrate, the transactional parts of the business with the analytic parts of the business, one needs data streaming platform. So I'm not surprised that it's nearly 9 out of 10 executives say, oh, this is absolutely indispensable to how we do that in the market.
Yeah, thinking about future proofing, obviously, AI is the buzz, and it's not going anywhere. I think it's going to be, it's bigger than the internet, right? But it's an interesting data challenge, right? And that's at its heart. It's another data challenge. It's something that even before it exploded over the last 2 or 3 years, that we were working here at Confluent. You need integrated data, and you need it normalized, so that you can make it available to whatever that thing is, right? And there's probably someone committing some code to GitHub right now that will be some future technology that we'll be adopting in 5 years that we have no idea about. But if you have your data streaming platform, you're already ready to go, more or less, right? Because you'll either build some type of connector to it or have some type of native integration to it. So our third finding is how data streaming platforms feed AI systems. So there was a really interesting statistic where 87% of respondents noted that data streaming platforms will increasingly feed real-time data to AI. So Andrew, why is it so important to give your AI real-time trustworthy data?
Yeah, I think AI is only ever as good as the data that contextualizes it. And I think a few things about the modern usage of AI. I think again, as I mentioned earlier, I've been doing this a long time. And in the previous era, AI was very purpose built. I had to hire this legion of PhDs in data science and statistics to go to every use case and do things like feature engineering and model training and then bias characterization. And I maybe did that once a week. The MLOps tooling was very batch oriented. So doing that once a week or so, that was enough.
Mm-hmm.
I think now that we have these foundation models, which are incredible, but they're very expensive to build. They're very difficult to bring to market. But once they are, they're inherently reusable.
Mm-hmm.
But we've all played with things like ChatGPT, and it's a fun toy.
Absolutely.
But it's not adequate for your enterprise use cases because it doesn't really know anything about your domain-specific data. And so some of the best patterns we know to actually use it and actually make it in such a way that it empowers our use cases is to contextualize it in real time with the most relevant enterprise data. So we tend to couple it with prompts with patterns like RAG or KAG, or we have these agentic things that find the right data and react to them and ask intelligent questions to an LLM. I mean, basically all the patterns we have reduced to taking domain-specific data to either ask a better question or ask a better informed question with the LLM. And obviously to deliver the reactive, sophisticated experiences that our internal knowledge workers and our external customers have come to expect, it needs to be done in real time.
Absolutely.
We don't want to wait hours, and certainly we don't want to do it on data that is hours old or days old.
Right.
We're not going to get the best decision making that way. And so I think what we found is in this new era of AI, of generative AI and agentic AI, that the demands on data have become more real time.
And I know we already touched on this, but some of the things that were really called out were data silos,
Yep.
breaking down those data silos, having that full integration, but also normalizing data.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about that a bit? Sure. So again, I had my insight on these larger enterprises, but again, from your experience, what do you think the biggest challenge is to data integration for a large or mid-sized enterprise?
I mean, I think it is. It's data movement and data trustworthiness, and so it's taking those data silos and getting that data in a place where it can be readily consumed by some analytic or some AI system. And that ends up being a really big challenge. You look at how that's conventionally done today. We have these batch-oriented ETL pipelines where I take data and I take it out of one place and I do something to it.
Right.
That tends to be I denormalize it, or I maybe join it. I do some kind of like fact dimension enrichment, or I do some, apply some business logic to transform the data in some way. Maybe the stateless way, maybe not. But it turns out most of the time, in order to do anything useful, there are multiple steps to that. So I have these cascading batch-oriented processes. So maybe one takes an hour or runs once an hour, but the one behind it also runs once an hour. And the one behind that, maybe every 2 hours or 3. This is not hard to envision why all of a sudden you get to the point where you have these reports that only get run once a day. And then once it's run, you get some kind of dashboard with a view only of yesterday's data. And I think that's a core challenge that these enterprises face when they do this kind of work today, is that, again, for a long time, that was a good enough way to run the business. Even for those enterprises that used AI, because as we talked about, MLOps is very batch oriented. That was actually okay.
Right.
But now that we have, again, these more generative AI kinds of applications, these things that need to be contextualized in real time, that way of operating is no longer acceptable.
Sure. Yeah, I think just in general, the way our world is, whether we're on a cell phone or on a computer, we press a button, we expect something to happen.
Yeah.
Right? We're now in this world where, you can press a button on your phone and there's a car outside waiting for you within a couple of minutes, right? So the expectations are at the highest we've ever had in terms of our technological systems. So the data streaming platform and what we call connectors, or, I like to think of it as just data integration. We have these number of connectors that help break up those data silos. So whether you're building your microservices and they're natively talking to your data streaming platform, we also have these things that can take a database or a mainframe and then treat those as essentially producers into data streaming. So that's kind of how it handles or helps with the data silos. But let's talk more about consistent data.
Yeah.
So now you have all your data in your data streaming platform, but you need to have it in maybe a specific format, or perhaps you need 2 different data streams to be merged into a single data stream to provide that specific context to your AI systems. Yeah. How do data streaming platforms help with that?
Yeah, so we have a pattern that we've been promoting for years now called shift left. Mm-hmm. And I think it really helps do exactly what you described. And the way I'd say it's like this is, you think if you're a detective that has to go solve a crime, you want to do it, right as the evidence is there.
You get the crimes.
Yeah, you don't want to do it after it's been collected and boxed up and now you've got a cold case. That's right. And yet that's exactly what we do when it comes to data governance most of the time. if you look at most enterprises that rely on platforms like the Databricks or Snowflake or BigQuery or Athena or any of them really, I tend to do a big data collection. I use some kind of ELT workflow to basically make the data in the state that I want it to be in. And then I try and apply governance to it. But after it's been transformed so many times, it can be really difficult to reason about the provenance of that data, where it came from, and then also to contextualize it, to say like, oh, this is what it actually was to begin with. And this is how it was informed, and this is why I should trust it. This is how that data contract should apply. And so what we talk about with the data shift platform and the shift left pattern is to apply processing and governance as close to data production as we can. And I think that ends up because if you're getting data as soon as it's produced, before it's been touched by other things, it's so much easier to reason about where it came from and what it means. I was a college professor for a long time. People would always ask me, oh, should I go to graduate school? And I'd always say, well, graduate school never gets easier or more convenient. I think data governance is much the same way.
Sure.
It never gets easier or more convenient. So I think that there's this temptation, I think, to just collect the data, just get it in, and then figure it out later. But that, I think, is something that a lot of enterprises grow to regret, especially as they scale, and especially as they try and make that data to scale across teams. I think is the other thing that happens. It's not too hard for a single team that sources data to then reason about what it means later.
Right.
But that's not really the modern enterprise. That's not really what competitive businesses do. I make data, I produce it once, and then in a sense, data is this product that gets reused throughout the enterprise. But that is really impossible to do without governance.
Yeah, I mean, some enterprises, you could have dozens, even hundreds of different teams that are generating data, and getting that governance and that quality as close to the source of those originators is absolutely key. And our fourth finding is how shifting left, which perfect timing with the way we ended our last finding, unlocks early data value. So 2/3 of respondents felt that shifting left were going to unlock tremendous value. So one of the things that you talked about already is, this idea of, building or integrating and normalizing data.
Yep.
But there's something that we talk about here quite a bit at Confluent, and that's data products.
Yes.
And reusability. So can you tell the audience a bit more what data products are and why reusability is so important?
Yeah, so data products were originated by Degani as part of a formalization of what she called data mesh. Mm-hmm. And it was this thing that applied in, we'll say, Analytica state of data. And so basically for people that did OLAP kinds of things, it was about promoting reusability. Data is not this sort of detritus. It's not this legacy thing that has to be wrestled with. Data itself should be an asset to the company. It should be a thing that has value in and of itself. It should be a product. Some of the properties of that then is if data is a reusable product, then it's inherently contextualized. It's inherently trustworthy. It's inherently secure. It's inherently discoverable. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what we have thought and looked at is we really love that idea, but we thought it wasn't generalizable enough. That in the age of AI, one needs data reusability, not just in the analytic state, but all over the enterprise. And we need it particularly in those applications that power the business, those transactional systems that are actually used in our so-called operational parts of the business. And so, data products are about promoting reusability of data through good governance and good discoverability.
Right. And to give you an example of a data product, let's say, for example, you have some type of data stream that's purely transactional, but it's missing some key data. It doesn't have the user or the individual that perhaps ran that transaction. So taking a stream of customer data and a stream of transactional data and then merging that data together on some type of shared field. Yeah, that's an example of a data product or something that maybe someone would think of as like a customer 360. Yeah. So I know a lot of times you would see these high quality data products but they would eventually go to the analytical state and then someone would do something like reverse ETL. Yeah. Right. Which to me always seems strange because if you already had the data in your operation state, why not make the reusable data product there? Yep. And when I think of shifting left and I think about these analytics teams, again, in the example of a very large enterprise, you have dozens of data producers. And then in a lot of organizations, they'll send all of that data and it's not high quality and it's not governed, and they'll just put it in their data lake, their lake house. And now these analytical teams have to figure it all out. Yep. But what I found talking to customers is that, these analytical teams, they don't necessarily understand the sources of data. Sometimes they're like, what does this field even mean? Yep. Right. So how do you think, we had a recent announcement, a partnership announcement with Databricks, and we are partnering with quite a few of the fantastic lakehouse providers out there in the industry. How do you think shifting left and data products will accelerate analytical things?
Yeah, so I think that it addresses one of the core problems you mentioned, which is that we've put an unfair burden on our data engineers, our data scientists to try and make sense of this.
Right.
That, as you say, we sort of tend to take every use case and we look at it in isolation, and we take all the data we think we need and we sort of source it independently each time. And that can be really inefficient. It can be really expensive, and it can end up with a lot of inconsistencies for the business. If you think about all the different ways one could recognize revenue or something, if I'm doing it slightly differently for slightly different calculations, well, that can lead to a really catastrophic revision in the street or something. And so what we really talk about with Shift Left is a federated data ownership. The people that produce data, they really are the best qualified to say what it means and to apply that initial processing and that initial governance to it. Some of that's a little bit wider. That's a little more of Dagani's data mesh framework, but I think that part absolutely resonates as well. You don't really get to data products where data is a reusable asset without fixing the ownership of it. And so it's simply not enough to just put CDC on a bunch of databases and then let someone else figure it out downstream. Really, we need to think about deliberately, how does that data get contextualized according to what are believed to be common and popular consumption patterns. And the people that are best positioned to know that and to do that are the people that originate the data itself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So for our viewers, if any of these particular findings resonated with you, right? If this is the pain you're going through today, or perhaps, one of these findings are where you're going directionally with your organization, I really encourage you to check out, we'll have links attached to this video. Go out there and read the report. If you only have so much time, you can read the details on one or more of the findings, or, at least check out the executive summary. There is a tremendous amount of data. We've only kind of touched some of the findings here, but there's a tremendous amount of specific data and insight that you'll get from the report. So I really encourage you. Andrew, thank you so much for having this chat with me today. And thank you for everything you do here for Confluent.
Oh, no, just my pleasure. It's so great to be here. So great to be on the program. And we're just so excited to share the data stream report with all of you. It's really cool, really interactive. I highly encourage you to check it out. I always learn a tremendous amount every year. I hope you do too.
And as always, we're brought to you by Confluent. Happy streaming.
Thank you.